Howdy y'all, welcome back. Thank you for being here. The oldest surviving post-Roman castle in all of Britain just so happens to be the Chepstow Castle in Monmouthshire, Wales. This mostly surviving masterpiece is recorded in the annals of history as being founded in 1066 or 1067 and remained in use until 1685. One question that often arises when discussing these picturesque castles of the Old World is what occurred for the hundreds of years that these castles sat unused before the Industrial Revolution. According to most narratives we sink our teeth into, towns quickly developed around these defensive fortifications, becoming the mainstays for the rapidly growing communities to be shielded by the castle's often immense and extensive walls. In the case of Chepstow Castle, just like so many others of the time period, the intricate fortification appears to be quite literally built into the rock formation below, as if the construction process was able to utilize every single natural curve of the cliffside to create a unique structure that was nearly impenetrable. Yet the confusion may come in understanding just how these meticulous forts were erected, as today it's very difficult to determine the process used to form such a seamless and harmonious design. It becomes nearly impossible to decipher exactly where the man-made construction ends and the naturally occurring rock formation begins. Furthermore, the intensity in which these castles appear to have been inserted into larger overarching narratives only adds fuel to the fire, and the history becomes convoluted when you realize in different regions, these castles have different designations, making a complete and extensive list of, for example, rock castles nearly impossible. For how can a castle be built on a mountain or cliffside using simple hand tools and pack animals? And then following the founding of said castle, entire communities evolved to reside in or around the confines of the castle, to the point the castle served as the basis or reason for the historical narrative itself. Yet, in almost every narrative we have, at some point before the Industrial Revolution, these castles going through a series of mishaps and often being torn down, completely renovated, or in some rare instances, allowed to remain standing, but abandoned. Take for example the Chepstow Castle. History tells us this is the oldest surviving fort of any kind built out of stone in Britain after Romans abandoned the island. Meaning, this castle should have, quote-unquote, no Roman influence. While it's clearly a rock castle, we are told it's considered one of the earliest stone examples of a Motte-and-Bailey Castle. A Motte-and-Bailey Castle is a fortification, usually large, built on elevated grounds, in this instance, a cliffside, but often these mottes were found on man-made earthen mounds, sometimes dozens of feet tall. The bailey, or baileys, were additional earthworks which formed a protective ditch or palisade that surrounded the structure. If this description reminds you of other important sites we've covered looking at history, you are not alone, as it appears some form of the Motte-and-Bailey Castle was being utilized in nearly all corners of the realm. Indigenous Americans built earthen mounds, often with fortifications on top, and a series of steps or earthen baileys strategically and often concentrically surrounding the structure. We see similar motifs for defensive fortifications all across the realm. Yet in the case of European castles with this design, like Chepstow, we are told they arose exclusively from Normandy during the Norman Conquest. However, we are told this particular type of castle then became prominent in the Netherlands, France, Denmark, Scotland, Ireland, and most of England. How complex and difficult would one of these masterpieces truly be to build? Well, according to the current narrative, Motte-and-Bailey castles were amongst the easiest to construct and required but one master mason with a team of unskilled and untrained laborers. To bring this full circle, let's discuss the history of Chepstow Castle rapidly. William the Conqueror leader of the Norman Conquest, spent a cornucopia of resources to secure and found the castle at Chepstow in 1066, seeing the location as key to his victory. However, we're also told before William the Conqueror, nothing existed in this location. Yet that detail itself is brought into question later in this very same narrative, which states that Chepstow and the exact site of the castle may have been a prehistoric stronghold which was abandoned thousands of years ago. Further adding to this detail is that Chepstow Castle was partially constructed using the fallen stones of an ancient Roman fort nearby, known as Carwent. We're told Chepstow Castle can be tied directly to the kings of Gwent in ancient Wales, and it's worth note that many ancient names and titles in this region bore the ending letters of W, E, N, and most times T, which indicated their ties to Gwent. Adding more context to this, William the Conqueror's royal counselor and a man who acted as the royal architect, William FitzOsbern, is given credit for orchestrating the castle's founding. Nothing spectacular on the surface, except when you look into the history of William FitzOsbern, you come to find that he is given credit for founding dozens of massive structures, many similar in grandeur to Chepstow Castle, all across lands which eventually fell to the Normans. He was only first employed by the crown in 1066, and from 1066 through his passing in 1071, could it have been physically possible for him to oversee the founding, the alleged construction, of dozens of massive castles similar in size to this one? And furthermore, how in-depth could the planning be without any real means of direct communication? Sure, you could use letter correspondences, but even those would merit delays. Now, imagine the materials and the manpower. Not only would a small army be needed to build even one of these castles in the time period we're told they were built in, but imagine dozens of these castles popping up across a growing Norman kingdom in roughly 5 years' time. Some of these castles took less than a year to build. Could one man have truly been responsible for designing dozens of Norman castles, all during the exact same time period, without the use of any modern tools, all built during a time of war and conquest by unskilled labor? Yet the castles themselves are advanced, so much so that many examples from this period still survive today. Chepstow Castle is written to have been built as not only a defensive stronghold, but also as a show of power by William the Conqueror as his first stone fortress, which would go on to define the border of England and Wales. However, worth note is that Chepstow Castle originally bore a Welsh name, which it retained for over 300 years, adding yet another wrinkle to this history. Why would the Normans' first stone castle be given a Welsh name, unless perhaps the castle had an even earlier history which is undocumented in the narrative? Chepstow was originally named Strygyle. As mentioned earlier, the castle became the strategic border between England and Wales, situated on the Wye River. Etymology again points to the people of Gwent as key to this history, as the name Wye is derived from the Welsh Gwy, associated with Gwent, and thus we can also see how the name Wales, or the title of the Welsh people, also derives from similar roots. The first instance of the castle of Strygyle appearing on documented records is within the ever-mysterious Doomsday Book of 1086, which appears to imply the castle is tied back to the even more ancient Offa's Rampart, a massive linear earthwork which covers an area of 150 miles along the border of Wales and England. This massive Offa's Rampart is roughly 8.5 feet tall and over 65 feet wide. Imagine the sheer amount of manpower that would be needed to construct something like this. The lords of Strygyle ruled over the castle, the massive port that quickly developed around it, and the merchant market, which became one of the largest in Britain. Strygyle lords were also considered to rule over Netherwent, the lowest part of the Welsh kingdom of Gwent. As Old Welsh traditions and ideals became ostracized during the Renaissance, the Lords of Strygail's authority was dissolved with the Laws and Wales Acts of 1535 through 1542, from which point on, Strygail Castle was referred to exclusively by its Saxon name of Chepstow. Chepstow Castle then became known as one of the great entertaining houses of Britain and was used for ceremonies and parties for more than 100 years. However, the massive cliffside fort was apparently sacked multiple times during the British Civil War from 1645 through 1648. From that point onward, Chepstow Castle became a barracks, an arsenal, and a leading political prison for Britain's most famous inmates. Yet, when the castle fell into the hands of the Duke of Beaufort in 1682, we're told he removed all military presence, gutted the castle, then leased it out to multiple different parties, including allowing parts to become an overgrown farmland and turning other underground layers of the castle into one of Britain's earliest glass factories. We're told by 1793, the castle had been abandoned and allowed to become overgrown. By 1840, the still standing castle miraculously had a resurgence, as we're told new industrial age technology, like the steam engine, awarded society with a renewed interest in visiting ancient and monumental locations. By 1880, the castle was again being used for pageants, incredibly large parties. It served as a large market at different times and also became the site for many of the first outdoor portrait photographs in the area. Yet, as important as Chepstow Castle is written to have been, it was only first excavated in 1911, and the story about the excavation is pretty crazy. It was after the Duke of Beaufort repeatedly attempted to sell the castle without success that Dr. Orville Ward Owen leased the land to conduct the first large-scale excavations. However, Dr. Owen was not attempting to find deeper layers of the architecture per se, or to preserve the structure, but on the contrary, he was attempting to tear apart the castle grounds to reveal what secrets he believed that they held, because Dr. Owen was of the belief that not only did Sir Francis Bacon write many, if not all, of Shakespeare's plays, but the good doctor also believed that proof that this cover-up took place was contained on or around the grounds of Chepstow Castle, where he believed the evidence had been covered over or buried somewhere within the fortification. Wow. The year following this excavation, Chepstow Castle was the site to one of the most important silent movies in British history, known as Ivanhoe, which was filmed exclusively at the castle grounds. Following filming, the castle was purchased by business magnate William Royce Lesat, who conducted a series of renovations before transferring the property to the Ministry of Works. In 1977, the great Terry Gilliam movie, Jabberwocky, was filmed exclusively on the castle grounds, and it was also the site for the recording of the epic metal album Chaos AD in 1993. The castle is believed today by occultists to hold many ancient secrets in supposed underground chambers which have yet to be fully excavated, seemingly implying the castle architecture is much more advanced than the current narrative gives it credit for. Could William FitzOsbern really have designed, constructed, and utilized this castle to subdue the Welsh, all in less than a year's time, all while simultaneously designing dozens of other castles and structures, having them all taken shape in less than 5 years of service from 1066 through 1071? Or could it be, my friends, that this castle may have been a leftover, founded from something much, much older?